The vast emptiness of space stretched endlessly around the research vessel, Stellar Pioneer, as it moved through the darkness between stars. Inside the ship's brightly lit control room, Dr. Hannah Park sat at her station, her dark eyes focused on the screens before her. Her fingers moved quickly over the controls as she checked and rechecked the readings from the planet below. Life signs are stronger than expected, she muttered to herself, making another note in her digital log. The planet, designated XO 339, had caught their attention months ago when long-range scans showed signs of complex organic activity. Now, after 6 months of space travel, they were finally close enough to begin their real work. Dr. Kim, the mission commander, floated over to Hannah's station. "How are the readings looking?" he asked, gripping the back of her chair to stay steady in the zero gravity. "Better than we hoped," Hannah replied, pointing to a particular set of numbers on her screen. "The atmosphere contains oxygen, and there are clear signs of plant life. But there's something odd about the energy patterns I'm picking up." Before Kim could respond, the ship's warning systems suddenly blazed to life. Red lights flashed throughout the control room as loud alarms pierced the air. Hannah's screens filled with error messages as their instruments detected a massive surge of radiation heading their way. "Solar flare," the ship's physicist, Dr. Lee, shouted from his station. "It's much stronger than anything we've seen in this system." The wave of energy hit them before they could raise their shields. The ship's systems sparked and died one by one as the radiation overwhelmed their circuits. Hannah felt her stomach lurch as the artificial gravity failed. Around her, she could hear her crewmates shouting as they tried to regain control of the dying ship. "We're being pulled into the planet's gravity well," Kim yelled, now strapped into the commander's chair. "Everyone, get to your crash positions." Hannah barely managed to secure herself in her crash webbing before the ship began to shake violently. Through the viewing windows, she could see the planet's atmosphere beginning to glow around them as they fell. The heat shields were failing, and the ship's hull groaned under the strain. The last thing Hannah saw before losing consciousness was the strange, glowing forest rushing up to meet them. The ship's reinforced hull screamed as it tore through the alien trees, each impact feeling like a hammer blow against her body. Despite the crash webbing, the G-forces were overwhelming. Around her, she could hear the cries of her crewmates growing weaker as one by one, they fell silent. When Hannah finally opened her eyes, the control room was dark and still. Emergency lights cast a weak red glow over the wreckage. The air smelled of burned metal and something strange, a sweet alien scent from the planet's vegetation. Her head pounded as she carefully undid her crash webbing, her movements slow and painful. "Dr. Kim," she called out, her voice hoarse. "Dr. Lee. Anyone." Only silence answered her. With shaking legs, she made her way to the commander's chair. Dr. Kim sat motionless, his eyes closed. She checked for a pulse but found nothing. Moving from station to station, she found the same at each one. All 7 of her crewmates, people she had lived and worked with for months, were gone. The reality of her situation began to sink in as she made her way to the emergency supplies. The ship's hull had cracked open in several places, letting in the alien air. By some miracle, her initial readings had been correct. The atmosphere was breathable. But that was the only piece of good news she could find. The emergency beacon, their only way to call for help, was crushed beyond repair. The ship's main communications array had been destroyed in the crash. Even the backup systems were fried from the solar flare. Hannah stood in the broken doorway of the control room, looking out at the strange forest around her. Tall trees with glowing blue leaves stretched up toward an alien sky where 2 suns were setting. The ground was covered in phosphorescent plants that pulsed with a gentle light, making the whole valley glow like something from a dream or a nightmare. She was alone on an unknown world, surrounded by alien life forms with no way to call for help. The nearest human settlement was light years away. Even if someone realized they were missing, it would take months for a rescue mission to reach her. Hannah took a deep breath of the sweet-smelling air and forced herself to think like the scientist she was. She had survived. She had emergency supplies. She had her training. Now she needed to focus on staying alive long enough for help to arrive. As darkness fell, she began the grim task of gathering what she could from the wreck. She found enough supplies to set up a small camp near the ship: emergency rations, water purification tablets, basic tools, and a portable scanner that had survived the crash. As she worked, she tried not to look at the bodies of her crewmates, now covered with emergency blankets in what remained of the control room. Tomorrow, she would need to give them a proper burial. But for tonight, she needed to focus on survival. The strange forest grew brighter as night fell completely, the glowing plants casting enough light to see by. Unfamiliar sounds echoed through the trees, calls and movements of alien creatures she couldn't identify. Hannah sealed herself inside her emergency shelter, clutching the one working laser pistol she'd found in the wreckage. As exhaustion finally overtook her, her last thoughts were of Earth, so impossibly far away, and of the unknown dangers that might be waiting for her when the alien suns rose again. She was no longer just a scientist studying life on other worlds. Now she was part of that life, fighting to survive in an ecosystem that had evolved without any input from Earth. Only time would tell if humans were ready for such a challenge. Part 2. First contact. 3 days had passed since the crash, and Hannah had fallen into a careful routine. Each morning, she would check her camp's perimeter, gather samples of the glowing plants, and record any new observations in her salvaged datapad. The strange forest was full of life, but so far, nothing had seemed dangerous. Most creatures she spotted were small, plant-eating things that ran away at her approach. On the morning of the 4th day, Hannah was collecting water from a nearby stream when she first noticed something was different. The small animals that usually chirped and scurried around had gone quiet. The forest itself seemed to be holding its breath. She reached slowly for her laser pistol, scanning the glowing trees around her. That's when she saw them. They emerged from the forest like living sculptures, their movements so smooth they seemed to float across the ground. Hannah's first thought was that they looked like a cross between horses and deer, but that comparison fell short. They stood taller than any earth horse, moving on 4 long legs that ended in delicate 4-toed feet. Their bodies were covered in fur that shifted colors as they moved, like oil on water. But it was their faces that told Hannah she wasn't dealing with simple animals. Large, intelligent eyes studied her with clear curiosity. Their heads were shaped somewhat like Earth's deer, but with higher foreheads and more defined features. They wore what were clearly tools and devices attached to harnesses around their bodies. Hannah stayed very still, her hand moving away from her weapon. She could count 6 of them, arranged in a half circle about 10 meters away. They seemed just as careful in their movements as she was. "Hello," she said softly, keeping her hands where they could see them. "I mean no harm." One of the creatures stepped forward. It wore more devices than the others, including something that looked like a screen mounted on its harness. As Hannah watched, it pressed something with one of its front hooves, and a soft humming filled the air. "We greet you, strange one," a mechanical voice said, coming from the device. "We are the Miri. This is our world." Hannah's scientific mind raced with excitement even as she maintained her calm exterior. A spacefaring civilization, and they had universal translators. "I am Hannah Park," she replied carefully. "I am a human from the planet Earth. My ship crashed here 3 days ago. I am the only survivor." The lead Miri's ears twitched forward with interest. The translator hummed again. "We detected your ship's arrival, but feared approaching. You are different from any life form we have encountered." "Different how?" Hannah asked, though she was beginning to understand. Everything about their body language spoke of a prey species, the way they kept their distance, how their ears constantly moved to catch sounds, their readiness to flee. The Miri moved closer, but still maintained a careful distance. "You have forward-facing eyes." The translator spoke. "Sharp teeth, clawed hands, These are features we have never seen in any intelligent species. Hannah nodded slowly. On my world, humans evolved as predators, she explained, then quickly added as they stepped back. But we are also scientists and explorers. We use our intelligence more than our physical traits now. This seemed to fascinate them. More of the Muri began asking questions through their devices, and Hannah found herself in the middle of an impromptu scientific exchange. They were particularly interested in her teeth, her ability to grip things with her hands, and the way she could move quickly in any direction on two legs. As they talked, the Muri explained their own society. They were a peaceful species that had evolved without natural predators on their world. Their technology had developed along different lines than humanity's, focused on harmony with their environment rather than overcoming threats. They had achieved space travel through cooperation with other similar species from nearby star systems. But now we face a threat we cannot understand. The lead Muri explained, its fur shifting to darker colors that Hannah was beginning to recognize as a sign of distress. A plant species arrived on an asteroid 2 cycles ago. We thought it beautiful at first and let it grow in our gardens. We did not understand that plants could be hungry. The translator struggled with certain concepts, but Hannah understood. The Vora, she said, remembering their earlier mention of it. What does it do? The Muri's description sent chills down her spine. The Vora wasn't just an invasive species, it was actively hunting. It had started in their gardens but quickly spread to the forests. It could move, albeit slowly, and it released spores that grew into new plants. Worse, it seemed to be learning, adapting its hunting strategies. We have no defense against such behavior, one of the younger Muri added through its translator. Our society never needed to develop ways to fight. We can run, we can hide, but we cannot stop its spread. Hannah looked back at her camp, thinking of her xenobiology equipment and the samples she'd been collecting. Maybe I can help, she said slowly. On Earth, we have carnivorous plants too. Not as advanced as your Vora sounds, but I understand the principles, and I understand predatory behavior. The Muri discussed among themselves, their fur shifting through various colors. Finally, the leader turned back to her. We would welcome your help, Hannah Park. Will you come to our city? We have much to learn from each other. As Hannah packed up her camp and prepared to leave with the Muri, she couldn't help but smile at the irony. She had crash-landed on this alien world thinking she would have to survive alone. Instead, she had found an advanced civilization that needed something only a human could provide, the understanding of a predator. The binary suns were high in the sky as they set out, the Muri moving with their fluid grace while Hannah walked beside them. She had no way of knowing it yet, but this was the beginning of a partnership that would change both their species forever. Part 3. The Awakening. A month had passed since Hannah first arrived at the Muri city. Their buildings were unlike anything she had seen before, tall structures that seemed to grow from the ground itself, with spiraling ramps instead of stairs to accommodate their four-legged form. They had given her a living space near their main research center, modified to suit her two-legged needs. But something strange was happening to her body. It started with small things. One night, while walking back to her quarters, Hannah realized she could see perfectly despite the main lights being dimmed. The 3 moons cast only weak light through the windows, yet every detail stood out clearly to her eyes. At first, she thought the Muri had adjusted the lighting, but they assured her they hadn't. The changes continued. During her morning walk in the research garden, Hannah found herself stopping, head tilted, listening to sounds she had never noticed before. She could hear the soft footsteps of Muri walking on upper floors, the rustle of leaves in the wind, even the quiet movements of small animals in the garden's undergrowth. The lead Muri scientist, Kai, watched her with growing interest. "Your body is adapting to our world," he said through his translator one morning. "It is fascinating to observe." Hannah had to agree. Her sense of smell grew stronger each day. She could now tell which Muri had recently visited her room, and could even track the path of garden animals by their scent alone. Her muscles felt stronger, her reflexes sharper. It must be something in the atmosphere, Hannah theorized as she let Kai scan her with their medical equipment. Maybe the different air pressure or the mixture of gases is triggering dormant human abilities. The young Muri scientist working with them, Ben, suggested running more tests. They set up a series of experiments to measure Hannah's changing abilities. She could now see clearly in almost total darkness. Her hearing range had expanded far beyond normal human limits. Her sense of smell was becoming as keen as a tracking dog's. But the real breakthrough came during an ordinary afternoon in the research facility. Hannah was helping Kai and Ben study plant samples from the outer forest. Several young Muri were also in the lab, learning about scientific methods. The facility's tall ceilings and open design meant multiple levels were visible above them, with Muri moving about on their raised walkways. That's when Hannah heard it, a tiny crack, so faint that even the Muri's sensitive ears missed it. Her head snapped up, eyes locking onto a support beam 3 levels above them. Another crack, and she saw the beam shift slightly. "Everyone move," she shouted, but there wasn't time. A young Muri stood directly under the failing section, too far for anyone to reach in time. Hannah didn't think. Her body moved on pure instinct. She crossed the room in 2 bounds, covering more distance than should have been possible. Her muscles coiled and released like springs as she leaped upward, far higher than any human should have been able to jump. Her arms wrapped around the young Muri just as the beam gave way. She twisted in midair, pulling them both clear of the falling debris. They landed safely several meters away, Hannah's body instinctively rolling to absorb the impact. The entire incident took less than 3 seconds. Silence fell over the lab. Every Muri present stared at Hannah with new eyes. She had moved faster than their fastest runners, jumped higher than their best athletes, and her reaction time had been beyond anything they had ever seen. "How did you do that?" Kai asked, his fur shifting through colors of amazement and slight fear. Hannah stood slowly, helping the young Muri to its feet. I'm not sure. I just reacted." "You moved like a predator," Ben said quietly through his translator. "We have seen such movements in historical recordings from other worlds, but never in person." Hannah looked at her hands, understanding dawning. The planet wasn't just awakening dormant human abilities, it was bringing out the predator that lurked in human DNA. Millions of years of evolution as hunters had left their mark on the human body, and something about this world was amplifying those traits. The young Muri she had saved approached her cautiously. Through its translator, it said, "Thank you. I have never seen anything move so fast." Word of the incident spread quickly through the Muri city. Soon, more scientists wanted to study her changes. They set up new tests, measuring her speed, strength, and reflexes. The results amazed them. Hannah was now moving with the speed and precision of Earth's big cats, while keeping her human intelligence and problem-solving abilities. But it was more than just physical changes. Her mind felt sharper too. She found herself automatically analyzing movement patterns, noticing small details, thinking in terms of pursuit and capture. The predatory instincts that humans had buried under civilization were resurrecting. The Muri watched all this with a mixture of fear and fascination. They had never evolved such abilities, never needed them in their peaceful world. Now they had living proof of what a predator species could do, and they were beginning to understand why such traits had evolved in the first place. As Hannah lay in her bed that night, listening to the distant sounds of the city and the forest beyond, she wondered what other changes were yet to come. The predator inside her was awakening, and somehow she knew this was just the beginning. Part 4. The hunt begins. Reports from the northern settlements had become increasingly worrying. First came news of missing Muri from the outer farming areas. Then entire families vanished from their homes. When the small settlement of Green Valley went completely silent, the Muri Council could no longer ignore the threat. Hannah joined the investigation team headed by Dr. Min, the Muri's lead environmental scientist. As their transport glided over the forest toward Green Valley, she noticed how the usually colorful landscape had changed. Large patches of gray-green plants spread through the native vegetation like a disease. "That's the Vora," Min explained through his translator. "It grows faster than we can contain it." The settlement came into view, and everyone fell silent. The once beautiful buildings were covered in thick, ropey vines. Nothing moved in the streets. No Muri children played in the gardens. The entire place looked dead. "Land here," Hannah directed, pointing to a clear spot. "We need to see what happened." The Muri were nervous about leaving their transport, but Hannah's enhanced senses were already working. Her sharp eyes caught subtle movements in the Vora growth. Her nose picked up strange, sweet smells that seemed designed to attract prey. Her ears detected soft rustling that didn't match the wind. "It's hunting," she said suddenly, making the Muri team jump. "Look at how the vines are positioned. They're not growing randomly. They're creating paths, herding areas." Min moved closer to scan the plants. "But plants don't hunt," he protested. "They can't think." "Earth has carnivorous plants," Hannah explained, moving carefully through the empty settlement. "But this is different. This is organized. See how the vines block some streets but leave others open? It's creating traps." As they investigated further, Hannah's predator instincts screamed warnings at her. The Vora had taken over the settlement systematically. It blocked escape routes first, then herded the Muri into smaller and smaller areas. The sweet smell grew stronger near these trap zones. "It's working like a neural network," she realized, watching how the vines responded to movement. Each plant is connected, sharing information. When prey enters its territory, the whole network reacts. To demonstrate, she threw a piece of debris into a vine-covered area. The plants moved instantly, wrapping around the object with frightening speed. The Muri scientists backed away in horror. "How can we fight something like this?" one of the younger scientists asked, his fur dark with fear. Hannah's mind was already working in ways she had never experienced before. Her enhanced senses picked up patterns in the Vora's behavior. She could see how it hunted, where it was vulnerable. "Every predator has weaknesses," she said, her voice taking on a harder edge that made the Muri glance at each other nervously. "It's strong but slow. It needs to trap its prey because it can't chase them. And look, it only attacks when it thinks it has an advantage." She demonstrated by walking boldly into a Vora-infested area. The plants shifted but didn't attack. "It knows I'm too strong to be easy prey. It's waiting for weaker targets." Over the next few hours, Hannah tested the Vora's reactions. She identified its hunting patterns, found gaps in its defenses. Her predatory instincts, enhanced by the alien world, gave her insights the peaceful Muri could never have developed. "We need to think like hunters," she told the team as they gathered in their transport. "The Vora spreads out to find prey, but it must have a central point where it processes information. Find that, and we can herd it." The Muri watched in fascination as Hannah drew up hunting strategies. She mapped the Vora's spread, predicted its next moves, and identified potential weak points. It was the first time in their history that anyone had approached a problem this way. "You think like a hunter," Min observed, watching her work. "It's frightening but impressive." Hannah looked up from her maps. "Humans evolved as pursuit predators," she explained. "We didn't have the strongest claws or the sharpest teeth. We survived by outthinking our prey, understanding patterns, predicting behavior. That's what we need to do here." She began training the science team in basic hunting principles. The Muri were uncomfortable at first, but they soon saw the value. They learned to look for signs of the Vora's movement, to predict its hunting patterns, to identify vulnerable points in its network. A predator isn't just about killing, Hannah taught them. It's about understanding your target, knowing its strengths and weaknesses, finding the right moment to strike. As night fell over the abandoned settlement, Hannah stood watching the Vora's slow movements in the darkness. Her enhanced vision picked up subtle patterns in its growth. Her keen hearing detected the communication between different parts of the network. Her predator's mind assembled the pieces into a clear picture. The Vora had never faced a real predator before. It had evolved in an environment where every other species was prey. But now it faced something new. A human hunter with enhanced abilities and millions of years of predatory evolution behind her. "We start tomorrow," she told the team. "The Vora thinks it's the hunter here, but it's wrong. It's never faced anything like me before." The Muri scientists exchanged looks, their fur shifting with mixed emotions. They had never seen hunting as anything but horrifying. Now they were beginning to understand its importance in maintaining balance. Sometimes they realized you needed a predator to protect the prey. As they prepared to return to the city, Hannah's enhanced senses detected a change in the Vora's movements. It was reacting to their presence, adjusting its strategies. The hunt had already begun, even if the plant didn't know it yet. For the first time since evolving into their peaceful form, the Muri were glad to have a predator on their side. Part 5. Evolution of the Hunter. As the threat of the Vora grew, the Muri Council realized they needed to change their approach. They selected their two most adaptable young guards, Rin and Tai, to train with Hana. Though the Muri had never needed warriors before, these two had shown unusual courage in protecting their settlements. Hana met them in a cleared training area near the research center. Both Muri stood tall, their iridescent fur rippling with nervous energy. Through their translators, they expressed both excitement and fear about learning predator techniques. "We will start with observation," Hana told them. A predator's first skill is understanding their environment. She had them practice using their senses differently, teaching them to look for movement patterns and signs of disturbance. The training was difficult. The Muri's peaceful nature fought against predatory thinking. When Hana demonstrated a defensive strike, Rin's fur turned pale with distress. "I don't think I can do this," Rin said through the translator. "It feels wrong." "You're not learning to hurt," Hana explained patiently. "You're learning to protect. Think of your families, your young ones. Sometimes the kindest thing a protector can do is stop a threat." As days passed, Hana noticed her own body continuing to change. The planet's higher gravity had already made her stronger, but now her muscles were becoming denser, more powerful. She could run faster than ever before, jump higher, react more quickly. Her senses grew even sharper. One morning, while teaching Rin and Ta tracking techniques, Hana caught the scent of Vora spores on the wind from nearly a kilometer away. Her enhanced hearing picked up the subtle movements of the plant's growing tendrils. Her eyes could spot the smallest signs of its presence. "Your body is still adapting," Dr. Min observed during one of their regular checkups. "Your muscle density has increased by 40%. Your reaction time is 3 times faster than your original baseline." The changes weren't just physical. Hana's mind worked differently now. She found herself thinking in terms of territory, threats, and tactical advantages. When she looked at an area, she automatically noted escape routes, defensive positions, and potential hazards. During one training session, she was teaching Rin and Ta how to evade capture. Without warning, her enhanced hearing caught the sound of cracking wood. A large tree branch, weakened by Vora infection, was falling toward them. Hana moved without conscious thought. She tackled both Muri clear of danger, her enhanced muscles easily managing their weight. The branch crashed where they had been standing moments before. "That was amazing," Todd exclaimed through his translator. "How did you move so fast?" "I just reacted," Hana said, but she knew it was more than that. Her body and mind were becoming something new, not just human, not just predator, but a perfect blend of both. The breakthrough in understanding the Vora came during a late-night research session. Hana was studying tissue samples when her enhanced vision noticed something unusual. Under certain light, she could see faint patterns of electrical activity running through the plant structure. "Look at this," she called to Dr. Min. "The Vora isn't just connected physically. It's sending electrical signals through its network, like a giant nervous system." Further investigation revealed the truth. Each Vora network had a central cluster that acted like a brain, coordinating the actions of all connected plants. These clusters were typically hidden deep within the largest Vora growths. This is how it hunts so effectively, Hannah explained to her students. The whole network shares information. When one part finds prey, all parts know about it. But reaching these neural clusters would be incredibly dangerous. The Vora's defensive networks were dense and deadly. Any direct approach would be suicide. This is where your training becomes essential, Hannah told Rin and Ta. We need to think like hunters to defeat a hunter. She increased their training intensity. The Muri learned to move quietly, to understand wind direction and scent trails, to read the smallest signs of their target's presence. Though they would never be true predators, they were becoming something new, peaceful beings who could think tactically when needed. One evening, as they rested after training, Tai asked Hannah through his translator, "Does it frighten you? These changes in yourself?" Hannah considered the question carefully. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but I understand them now. Humans have always carried these predator instincts inside us. This planet hasn't changed who I am. It's just brought out abilities that were always there." Both Muri nodded, their fur shifting in patterns that Hannah had learned to read as understanding. They too were changing, finding a balance between their peaceful nature and their new protective abilities. As they prepared to face the Vora, Hannah knew that her transformation was nearly complete. The planet had awakened the hunter inside her, enhanced it, perfected it. But she remained human, with all the intelligence and compassion that implied. She wasn't just a predator, she was a protector. The Muri were beginning to understand this distinction. They watched as Hannah moved through their city, powerful but controlled, dangerous but gentle. She was living proof that being a predator didn't mean being a monster. Looking out over the distant forest where the Vora waited, Hannah felt her enhanced senses tingle with anticipation. The hunt was coming, and she was ready. The question was the Vora ready to face something it had never encountered before, a predator who could outthink it? Part 6. The Great Hunt. Dawn broke over the infected forest as Hannah and her team prepared for the assault. She had chosen 4 Muri for this mission, her students Rin and Tai, plus 2 others who had shown promise in training. Each wore special protective gear designed to resist the Vora's grabbing vines. "Remember your training," Hannah told them as they checked their equipment. "Move like water, strike like lightning. Don't let the Vora predict your movements." The main colony stretched before them, a massive growth of gray-green vines and pods that had taken over several square kilometers of forest. Somewhere in its center lay their target, the primary neural cluster that controlled this entire network. Hannah's enhanced senses were on full alert. She could smell the sweet trap scent the Vora used to lure prey. Her sharp eyes caught every movement in the vine masses. Her ears picked up the subtle electrical hum of the neural network. "The wind favors us," she said softly. "The Vora won't smell us coming. Rin, take point. Te, watch our backs." They moved forward in the formation they had practiced countless times. The Muri had learned well. Their natural grace combined with their new training made them almost silent despite their size. Hannah led them through gaps in the Vora's defense network that only her enhanced senses could detect. The first attack came suddenly. A mass of vines whipped toward them from 3 directions. But Hannah had anticipated this. "Pattern 3, she called out. The team scattered in practiced movements, each member rolling to safety while cutting through the attacking vines with their plasma tools. "Keep moving," Hannah ordered. "Don't let it surround us." They pressed deeper into the colony. The Vora's attacks grew more coordinated as they approached its center. Vines tried to separate them. Pods released clouds of stunning spores. But Hannah's tactical mind stayed one step ahead. She had studied the Vora's patterns for weeks. She knew it thought like a distributed network, each part working together, but slow to adapt to new threats. When it attacked from the left, she led her team right. When it tried to trap them, she found the weak points in its pattern. Halfway to their target, they encountered their first major obstacle, a wall of densely packed vora growth blocking their path. Too thick to cut through quickly, too high to climb safely. "It's trying to force us into those side passages," Tay observed through his translator. "They'll be trapped with defense vines." Hannah smiled. Her student had learned well. "Exactly. So we'll do what it doesn't expect. We'll go through." She pulled out a device they had prepared, a concentrated acid sprayer designed to specifically target vora tissue. As she began cutting a tunnel through the wall, her enhanced hearing picked up increased activity in the neural network. The vora was confused by this new tactic. "It's adapting," she warned her team. "Be ready for anything when we break through." The battle that followed would be remembered in Muri history for generations. As they approached the neural cluster, the vora threw everything it had at them. Vines attacked from all directions. Spore pods burst in coordinated patterns. The ground itself seemed to come alive with reaching tendrils. But this was what Hannah had trained for. Her enhanced body moved with incredible speed and precision. She leaped over attacking vines, rolled under spore clouds, cut through tendrils with perfect timing. Her tactical mind processed every threat, found every weakness. The Muri team performed beautifully, following her lead with their newfound skills. When vines attacked, they dodged. When paths closed, they found new ones. They weren't predators by nature, but they had learned to think like defenders. Finally, they'd reached the center chamber. The neural cluster pulsed before them, a massive organ-like structure that glowed with electrical activity, but it was heavily guarded by the densest concentration of vora defenses they had seen. "This is it," Hannah told her team. "Everything we've trained for. Ready?" The Muri's fur rippled with determination as they nodded. This was their world they were fighting for. What followed was a display of hunting prowess that even Hannah's ancestors would have admired. She moved like a force of nature, drawing the vora's attention while her team worked into position. Every move was calculated, every step placed perfectly. When the vora committed its defenses to stopping her frontal assault, the Muri struck from the sides. Their plasma cutters sliced through the protective layers around the neural cluster. The vora's attacks became erratic, uncoordinated, as its control center was exposed. Hannah made the final strike herself, driving a specially designed toxin injector into the heart of the neural cluster. The effect was immediate. The electrical pulses stuttered and died. The attacking vines fell limp. The entire colony began to wilt. As they made their way back out of the dying colony, the Muri looked at Hannah with new understanding. They had witnessed something their peaceful evolution had never prepared them for: the full power of a predator species fighting to protect others. "I never understood before," Rin said through his translator as they reached safety, "how being a predator could be a good thing. But today, it saved us all." Hannah smiled at her student. Being a predator isn't about destruction. It's about having the power to protect what matters. That's what humans learned over millions of years of evolution. Looking back at the collapsed vora colony, Hannah felt a deep satisfaction. Her transformation into this world's apex predator was complete. But more importantly, she had helped the Muri find their own strength. They would never be predators, but they had learned to be protectors. This hunt was over, but Hannah knew there would be others. The vora had more colonies, more neural clusters to find and destroy. But now they were ready. The hunter had evolved, and her pack was growing stronger every day. #Part 7. New Dawn. The victory over the main vora colony marked the beginning of a new era for the Muri world. In the months that followed, Hannah led more hunting parties to eliminate the remaining colonies. Each success brought new changes to Muri society, changes that would have been unthinkable just a few years before. Where once their buildings had been open and unprotected, now they incorporated clever defensive features. Not walls or weapons, but smart design that made them easier to defend. Hannah worked with Muri architects to create safe spaces and escape routes, teaching them to think about protection without sacrificing their peaceful nature. The biggest change came in education. Young Muri now learned basic defensive techniques as part of their regular studies. Hana watched with pride as Rin and Tai taught their first classes, showing young ones how to stay alert, how to move safely, how to protect themselves and others. "We don't teach them to hunt," Rin explained to a concerned parent through his translator. "We teach them to guard, to watch, to keep safe. These are skills every living thing should know." The training center where it had all started grew into something larger, the Guardian Academy. Here, Muri of all ages could learn what Hana called protective awareness. They learned to read their environment, to spot dangers before they became threats, to move with purpose and confidence. Hana's own capabilities had stabilized at a level far beyond normal human limits. Her senses remained incredibly sharp, her strength and speed enhanced by the planet's influence. But more importantly, her mind had found a perfect balance between predator instincts and human wisdom. She spent her days teaching, hunting the occasional Vora outbreak, and helping the Muri adapt to their changing world. Their society remained peaceful at its core, but now that peace was protected by knowledge and skill rather than ignorance. Then, 2 years after the crash, it happened. Hana was teaching an advanced class at the academy when her enhanced hearing picked up an unfamiliar sound from high in the atmosphere. Looking up, she saw something she had almost forgotten to hope for: a human rescue ship. The ship landed outside the city, and for the first time in 2 years, Hana saw other humans. The rescue team was shocked to find her not just alive, but thriving. They were even more surprised to find her living among an advanced alien civilization. "You've done amazing things here," the rescue team leader told her as she showed them around the city. "But it's time to come home. Earth's waiting for you." Hana stood on a high balcony that evening, watching the 3 moons rise while she considered her choice. Behind her, she could hear the sounds of the city, the gentle movements of the Muri, the soft hum of their technology, the voices of young ones practicing their protective techniques in the academy yard. Her students found her there. Rin, Tai, and dozens of others gathered quietly, their fur shifting with concern. "Will you leave us?" Tai asked through his translator, his fur dark with worry. Hana looked at them, her students, her friends, her pack. She thought about Earth, about human civilization, about all she had left behind. Then she thought about this world, about what she had become here, about the purpose she had found. "No," she said simply. "This is my home now." The joy that swept through the gathered Muri was visible in their rippling fur colors. The next day, when she told the rescue team her decision, they were surprised but understanding. They left her with a communication device to stay in touch with Earth and a promise to return with supplies and scientific equipment. In the years that followed, Hana watched her legacy grow. The Muri remained peaceful, but they were no longer helpless. Each generation learned to balance their gentle nature with protective skills. They began to explore their world more confidently, knowing they could handle its dangers. The Guardian Academy expanded, developing new techniques that blended Muri grace with human tactical thinking. Hana's first students became teachers themselves, passing on what they had learned while adding their own insights. Sometimes, late at night, Hana would climb to the highest point in the city and look out over the world that had changed her. Her enhanced vision could see for kilometers: the glowing forests, the Muri settlements, the places where the Vora had once grown, now reclaimed by native plants. She was no longer just a human, no longer just a scientist. She had become something new, a bridge between 2 very different ways of life. Her predator nature had found its perfect purpose: not to hunt, but to protect; not to kill, but to teach. The Muri had given her a new name, Shide, which in their language meant Guardian of Dawn. It was more than a title. It was a recognition of how she had helped them adapt to a new age without losing their essential nature. As she trained the next generation of Guardians, Hana often thought about the strange path that had brought her here. A crashed ship, a peaceful world, a predator's awakening, all leading to this new balance between strength and gentleness. The greatest strength, she would tell her students, is knowing when not to use it. The greatest wisdom is understanding that protection doesn't always mean fighting. And so the world turned, its 3 moons casting their light over a civilization that had found a new way forward. The Muri remained who they were, peaceful, gentle, kind. But now, they were also strong, aware, and protected. Hana had become what this world needed most. Not a conqueror, not a killer, but a guardian. A predator who used her strength to protect peace, her instincts to prevent violence, her wisdom to build rather than destroy. It was a new dawn indeed, for both her and the world she now called home.